What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the real stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by Trufan. And today on the podcast, we are joined by Deepak Sharma. Deepak is the host of the aptly named podcast, It's Not That Deep, founder and CEO of the marketing agency Deep Digital Media, and the creator of the online course Podcast Foundations. Deepak is also a good friend of mine. I'm very excited to finally have him here on the podcast today. Deepak, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, man. What a warm intro. I'm fired up, man. I'm so fired up to be on the other side of this.
I'm excited, man. I mean, I was on your podcast a while ago, so I figured it was only time. I made sure I still went through, I did my due diligence, I did my research. I made sure, just because I knew you were coming on the podcast, to when I was doing my notes, to do it listening to synthwave music, because I know you're a fan. So I made sure I was in the right mindset when I was going. So
Yes.
where I want to start today, I want to go all the way back to the beginning. And from my understanding, so you were born in India, correct?
Correct. Yep.
And so how old were you when you moved to Canada, and how did being a first generation Canadian impact you growing up?
Yeah. So I was actually like not even like 1 years old. Like I was like almost one when I came. So I don't really have any memory of it. It's just, to me, for all intents and purposes, I'm just Canadian pretty much. But for your second question there, like what's it like? Coming up that way, it's unique. It's a unique experience because your parents um they're here in this foreign country. They came with like not much money, not really knowing what to do, and how to make it, but they just kind of do, and they just kind of made things happen. And so, long story short, being the son of immigrant parents, a lot of people could probably relate to this. It's like you're living two lives basically. I grew up around predominantly a lot of white people in my elementary school, and I got along with them really well. And then I switched to a different elementary school where it was extremely multicultural, a lot of brown, black, whatever people from all over, got along with them really well. High school is just a melting pot, university even more of a melting pot. And so it was never really a big thing for me, but I've learned very well how to navigate like different types of people from different backgrounds and different contexts. And I think it's helped me really like a lot.
And were you ever entrepreneurial growing up, or is that something that came much later?
I was not entrepreneurial at all. I always thought growing up that you either were born a businessman or entrepreneur or whatever, or you're not. And I always thought I'm just not. I was always taught about just only hard work. Go get a good job. Be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, something like that, and just work your tail off for 40 years, and good things will come to you. But evidently, that's not really the route for me.
Yeah. So that early on, like your path was heavily athleticism and athletics, and the
Yes.
biggest one being football. So can you kind of tell me the story of how a boy named Trevor impacted your life when it comes to football?
Yeah, man. Trevor really had an amazing impact. It's crazy that you know this. I've always wanted to be on the podcast to get some of these, but this is mind blowing. But Trevor Desjardins, a good friend of mine, he played Orleans Bengals football. So that's like a kind of a local city football league here in Ottawa. And I remember he played, and we used to play just touch football, kind of more tackle actually at recess, or 2-on-2s or 3-on-3s just to have fun. And I was always decent. I was just a good, big, fast athlete. But it hadn't even crossed my mind to play actual professional, or not professional, but organized football. And so I remember he played, and I was kind of interested in it. And another good friend of mine, Scott, he was kind of interested in it. And we're just like, well, why don't we try out? And I don't remember exactly how it went down, but Trevor definitely convinced me to go try out. And, I made the team, and I had a lot of fun with it. So I thank Trevor for that. Shout out to him.
And correct any of these next facts if I get them wrong. But a number 98 wearing Deepak Sharma at Mosquito Madness lined up on the defensive side of the football for one of his first plays ever and made a sack. And as far as I know, that is the moment where you realized football was a sport for you. Is that true?
That's absolutely true. How the hell did you know that?
I honestly don't even remember. I should write down where I get my information because it's
You
just
should, man. That's wild, man. Some of my people closest in my life who watched me play football my whole life don't know that. But yeah, Mosquito Madness is basically this little scrimmage tournament kind of thing you play before you even start the season. So this was my first season playing football. You're right, I was wearing number 98, and I'm just this big, awkward brown dude who doesn't know how to even wear my pads properly. I didn't even get my game socks yet, like the socks that you have to wear. Like it was that early, and so this is my first action on the football field. And I remember specifically, I'll never forget this first play because um, I'm for people who don't know, the Nepean Sportsplex here in Ottawa, it used to have this turf field, this like astroturf kind of carpet. And remember, I mentioned I didn't have my socks at that point yet, and I'll never forget that because that first sack, right before that, I actually got a big face masking penalty because I didn't know what I was doing, and I grabbed the quarterback's face mask and I skidded across the turf and tore up my whole leg. It was bleeding. It was like all the skin. I still have scars from it, but that's when I knew I love football. This is so fun.
and so was your goal at that time then, like growing up, was it to play pro football? Like was that your end goal at the time?
I don't think I was that calculated about it when I was that young. I just really enjoyed hitting people. I always thought it was insane that this is a legal sport, that I can actually go and I'm being celebrated and glorified for actually destroying people on a football field. Like, why is this legal? I have no idea, but I'm gonna enjoy it. I'm gonna have fun with it. And then as I kind of got a little bit older and I started playing in high school and stuff like that, yeah, I did start to think, well, I'm pretty decent at this. Like, I want to play at the next level. But yeah, like it wasn't something that I'm like, I'm going to the NFL and that's it. It was like I'd love to have an opportunity to play at the next level because I know I have what it takes. But that didn't pan out the way I thought.
And so obviously with wanting to go to the next level, like you were just looking to get on the football field as much as humanly possible. And I know you were playing for two separate teams at the same time, one high school, one club football. But I know you battled with injuries and the biggest one being your shoulders. And I believe the first time you ever hurt your shoulders was on a kickoff, right?
Oh yes, it was on a kickoff against Glebe. It was our Sir Will football team, Sir Wilfrid Laurier in high school. I was in grade 9. It was my first time getting some action on the football field in high school, and it was a kickoff. And I played both special teams, offense and defense. And so I remember when I went to go do this kickoff, I was already like kind of gassed and tired, but I went down and I did like what you should never do in football and like have a lazy attempt at a tackle. So this guy kind of juked me out on a punt return, or it might have been a punt return. I'm not sure if it was a kickoff or a punt return, but one of those. And he kind of jukes me out, and instead of like chasing him properly and trying to tackle him from behind, I grabbed this part of his jersey, and he did like a spin move, and my shoulder popped out, and it was one of the most excruciating um the painful experiences I've ever had, yeah.
Mhm. And I know you know, like both your shoulders kind of impacted your ability to get on the field throughout high school. But so with wanting to play to the next level, despite these injuries, was that ever a possibility? Were you looking at playing youth sports football or even down in the South somewhere?
Yeah, so I never really I wasn't as forward thinking as I maybe should have been back in high school. I was really just taking it day by day. I just wanted to get back on the field more than anything. In hindsight, that first dislocation, I should have just called it for the season, really taken time to fully heal it up, do the rehab, do the physio, do whatever I need to get the shoulder back to strength. I did the opposite of that. After 2 or 3 weeks of having that injury, I'm like, coach, put me back in. I'm good to go. Just being the young and naive person that I was, I'm like, let me get back in there. It's too fun. And that kind of speaks to something that I'm sure we'll talk about is like, your identity as an athlete. I need to go perform. I need to be out there. And it's also addictive having people cheer you on, and you got your brothers on the field, and you take it way more seriously than it is. Like now looking back at it, This is grade 9 high school football here in Ottawa, Ontario. Not to talk it down, but it just like I wasn't on a track to go play in the NFL or anything like that. So to kind of answer your question, like I wasn't that calculated. Like, you know what, this I have to be back so I can get the proper highlight tape so that I could get into, you know, the university ball. And then no, I was never like that. I was just like, I got talent. I'm good at this thing. It's really fun. I want to keep doing the thing. So I'm just going to keep playing.
Mhm. And so then at what point, like when you ended up hanging up the cleats, was that just because your final high school game ended and there was no more football to be had? Or like when did that moment come?
So there's a weird story behind this because, and I don't recommend this for anybody, but in going into grade 11, so my second last year of high school, um, that's when I had a really bad shoulder injury. Like it kept getting re-injured, and it was to the point now where my shoulder's like barely hanging into the socket that it needs to be in. And so I'm like, okay, you know what? I shouldn't play this season. But that crazy part of me was like, now you got to play. And so I still played in a very limited capacity that year. I still suited up, wore the pads, and I was a long snapper for one season. So I had this other skill where I could snap the ball to for on kickoffs and on yeah, basically just on field goals. I mean, whenever we would try to kick a 3-point field goal or after a touchdown, I would jog onto the field and I'd snap because it didn't affect my shoulder. But me being fucking dumb, I would still go and run and try to tackle someone after I snapped the ball on like punts and stuff like that. And so all that to say, we won a championship that year, and so I was part of a championship team. But that next following year, I wanted to win another one, but at me actually playing. So that year, I did not play defense, and I just played tight end, and so I caught passes, and that was really fun as well. But all that to say, like I hung up the cleats after winning that second championship in my senior year, and I just knew that at that point there's so much damage been done to my shoulders that I can't play university ball. It's not going to happen. No scouts are going to look at a guy who already had a surgery on his shoulder and all this other stuff. So I kind of just put that career to rest, and I'm like, I'm just gonna be a rec league guy from now on, you know, move on to other things.
Yeah. And I'm assuming that like so once you finished playing in high school, like there probably wasn't like a loss of identity at that point because that's how it had always been. After the fall kind of ends, you don't play football until the following summer fall. So I'm assuming where you started to kind of try and figure out who am I now was the following year when you went to university when you should be getting ready to go. You should be getting into camp, but you're not getting into camp because you're done playing football. So did you struggle at all with the lack of identity kind of heading into university or even in the beginning of university?
Yeah, I mean, I there's definitely now looking back at it, that's definitely how it went. Subconsciously, I identified so strong with being an athlete and being in that world. But then now that I'm in university, I had to kind of shift my focus a bit. I'm like, okay, well, you know what? No problem. Put that on the back burner. That's not gonna be a reality now. But what can I do? Like what is like, okay, well, you know what? Maybe I can excel at school. Maybe I can make a lot of friends. Maybe I could join clubs. Maybe I could just try and experience a bunch of things. Maybe I could party a lot. So I just kind of tried to fill that void with other things to kind of keep me busy. And so when I did start university, there was a lot of that, like searching for who I am and what I like. And I think something that added a lot to that was the fact that some of my closest friends at the time did not go to the same university or even university. And so I almost felt like I was going at it alone, right? I just had to make a bunch of new friends. I just had to figure a lot of things out on my own. And so that plus not having the sport, plus, I mean, university, it's a completely different learning experience, plus not knowing what I wanted to do with my life, plus like I'm in this business degree and I don't even like know if I love this. All that craziness coupled with the fact that I'm starting uni at age 17, craziness. It's not good for anybody to have to make all those decisions that young.
Mhm. And I believe it was in your second year university where you stepped on the scale, you looked down and looked at the number and realized something had to change. So, what changes did you make to kind of pull yourself out of that situation?
Yeah, man. Well, first of all, get it like I didn't get into that situation overnight. Like it's not like I just, people talk about the freshman 15. For me, it was like the freshman 50. And that was like it just piled on slowly. And to be honest, I didn't even really notice because nothing had changed in terms of my habits of eating from when I was an athlete to when I'm in university. Like literally, I ate the exact same way I did like back in high school, big bowls of pasta, pizza, what have you, right? Without even worrying about it. But I didn't have the sport element. So gained a bunch of weight plus stress plus like all those things that I kind of mentioned before piled on, and I got to 308 pounds. Now I've always been a big guy. I walked around at even in high school at around 220 225, so I've always been a big dude. But 300, when I saw the 300, I didn't recognize myself in the mirror. I was fat. I legit just got fat, and I was not happy with that. And so I don't remember exactly what your question was there, but definitely that was jaw dropping for me. I'm like, I gotta do something here.
And so, like, what are the changes that you make then in that after that moment? Like, once you see 308 on the scale and you go, okay, things have to change. How do you go about enacting that change?
Well, I'd love to sit here and tell you that it was just this one day. I just like it, the switch flipped and I just became this absolute beast, like working out, eating clean, meditating, doing all this like great stuff that, maybe I talk about these days a little bit more, but it wasn't. It was a lot of, I'm going to start on Monday. And you know what? Let's just this one more big party thing is going to happen this weekend. After that, then I'm going to start. So I'd had known that I got to make a change since way before hitting that 308 pounds. Like when your clothes don't start to fit, when you start getting less attention from the opposite sex or the same sex if that's what you're into, um when you start not you start running out of breath when you're walking up a flight of stairs, when those kinds of things happen, like you're not fooling anybody but yourself when you try to deny that stuff. So I knew that I had to make a change, but what really changed was I was sick of waiting till Monday. I'm like, I don't like Monday is never gonna come when I'm gonna like meal prep for the week. I'm gonna go work out 5 times. I'm gonna like get to bed early. All the things that we know we need to do. All of us, we all kind of know what's healthy. We all know what's kind of, how to break our patterns and stuff. And to be honest, it was just like having that conversation with myself. Like, you know what, dude? Yeah, you have an exam or some stress or some event, but you're not gonna treat yourself with like some junior chickens on the way home, which is what I do. Like I would just take the easy, quick fix to food. I'd eat even like Timmy's or like grab some pizza or like whatever kind of food was just quick and easy and like, oh, I don't want to be hungry. I want to get rid of this. So I had to kind of change my relationship with food, and that was a ongoing process, and it took a long time. But I think the fitness aspect is really what I enjoy. I always liked working out. It's always been fun for me. So once I kind of got into working out a little bit more and I went to those Greco gyms and I was doing circuit training and stuff, once I realized like, and this is gonna sound horrible, but I would almost have like negative self-talk. I'm like, you piece of shit. Like you can barely do 20 push-ups right now without being out of breath. Like you slob, like what happened to you? You're barely doing a squat without knee pain. Like this is just how I'm motivated. I would say that stuff and I'd be like, I don't want to feel that way anymore. So it would kind of ripple effect into all kinds of areas. I want to train better. I want to look better. So I'm going to eat a little bit better. I'm going to get a little bit more sleep. I'm going to learn about, you know, my relationship with food. I'm going to like do all these kinds of different things to kind of bring that back to baseline.
Mhm. And so that's just one aspect of how you grew through university. And I've heard you say in the past that you learned a lot during university, but like 99.9% of it wasn't in the classroom. And I'm curious if you can explain as to why that is. Why you think you learn more outside than inside the classroom.
I like to give university a lot of flack, but I will say this disclaimer that I made it out the other side. And so, even when I have kind of some kind of negative views about university, that was my experience. I know a lot of people get a lot of great stuff from university. I know that we need university. Um, and I know that there's a lot of amazing programs out there. My personal experience was that everything like my 4-year degree did not have to be 4 years, and I kind of knew that right away when I was taking linear algebra and, like, some kind of like statistics classes, and, like, just some absolute fluff things that I don't think would actually, like, apply to real life and business. But the reason why I say I learned more outside of the classroom was because I was very involved in a lot of clubs. There was one called Jeux de Commerce where we would go out to these places in Quebec, and there'd be these case competitions, but there was a sports component. So I always played flag football in the sports component, and that was fun. And so I did that, and I got to meet a lot of people, and I got to network with a lot of people. I went to a lot of pub crawls. I did a lot of, like, meeting amazing people with different diverse backgrounds. And I also joined Enactus, which was a entrepreneurship club, but that focused on social change in businesses that could be sustainable and actually make a positive impact for the world. And I met some of the most amazing people in my life in that program. And so when I talk shit about university, it's not just university as a whole. It's the sitting in the classroom, it's the extremely high tuition, it's the fact that it didn't have to be 4 years, it's the fact that I mean, again, these expensive textbooks, you gotta get expensive everything, all these different things. It's like, that's not actually, it didn't teach me anything about business. The only like business stuff I learned were those soft skills, by meeting people, by being involved in things, by, taking kind of risks and, like, skipping that class, but instead going and watching a case competition or learning how someone does, builds a strategy for the sustainable farm business in Nunavut, or like all these crazy things that people were up to around me. That gave me a lot more energy than just sitting in a classroom learning about managerial accounting or any of those courses.
And I know you're not alone in having that kind of mindset when it comes to university. I hear that a lot, but I hear a lot of people say, like, skip university, but just do the university experience. Like, you don't have to pay for the tuition to go to the classes. But I'm curious to hear your opinion, because I don't even know if it's possible to have the university experience without actually going to university. I feel like it's just different when you're all in the same mindset. You're all kind of going through it. You can all relate to each other because you're all university students. Like, I don't know if it's possible to have a similar type experience as someone who's, like, working when they're supposed to be in school and just kind of trying to, like, tag along to all the university events.
There's nothing that brings people together more than the mutual hatred of something. And so when you are, like you said, going through it, when you're stressing to get in some cramming for a midterm or get an assignment in before 11:59 at night, when you see how other people deal with that stress, either through drinking, smoking, partying, whatever, however, like, they cope, it's it is like, it is hard to separate that. Imagine, you're doing all those things, like you said, you're holding down a job, you're in 5 or 6 full-time classes, you're trying to be involved in clubs, you maybe have a relationship, you're maybe doing this, that, blah, blah, blah. Imagine someone coming up and just sitting in class, like, with no notebook, no laptop, no nothing, because they're not worried about the exam or the test. And maybe they're not even worried about work or anything like that. And they're just there to soak up knowledge. Imagine how much that would bother you. You'd just be like, what the hell? Like, this guy's got it so good. But if it were up to me now, like, if I went back to uni today, I wouldn't even bring a laptop to class. I actually don't even think I would study as hard as I did for finals. And I know this is easy for me to say, but the amount of stress versus, like Ask me how many people have asked about my GPA since graduating. Like, I could probably count on one hand how many people have ever even asked for my GPA. Like, literally did not matter. And again, that's my experience, right? I'm not a doctor. I'm not someone who needs to go to law school or pursue even higher education. And so there's a place for that academic competition. But I just think that that's been kind of put on everybody now for every degree, whether you're in social sciences or the arts or this and that. I think there's just better ways to learn, man. And I got to experience that when I was on exchange.
Mhm. And I know, so when you graduated, ultimately, you posted on Instagram with the caption, "Grateful for this expensive yet valuable piece of paper." So you secure this valuable piece of paper, and you still don't actually know what you're gonna do with it. From my understanding, you graduated, you were kinda stuck. Like, you went on this amazing exchange, which if you'd like to, of course, talk to me about the exchange, I'd love to hear about it, but I'm also curious, so once you graduate, you've gone on this amazing exchange, you've had all these incredible experiences, you've gone through it all, but now you don't know where to go next. Like, what's running through your mind at that point in time?
Well, I think so many people get into university just because it's like the thing to do, or any post-secondary education. It's just like, well, you gotta go. It's like you have to go. You have to get that piece of paper. You gotta maybe a pressure from your parents, maybe just societal pressure. Maybe you just really want to go or whatever that is. But a lot of people don't really know what they want to do with their life. And I'm learning the older I get, that's not an age specific thing. That's just a human thing. Like people, so many people go like deep into their 40s, 50s, 60s, not knowing what the hell they want to do. And so I knew that it was a normal feeling. I knew that I was a little bit jaded with the whole idea of just getting a corporate job and just working up the ladder and working these crazy days and sucking up the bosses and just being corporate Deepak. Because in an alternate universe, I knew that that's me. I knew that I'm the guy wearing the full suit and sucking up to people and like buying my coffee, having like just being this pretend version of me. But I knew that same guy will come home and rip his mask off and just put his feet up and just be like, that sucked. And so kind of in a roundabout way, what I'm saying with that is like, yeah, I was completely lost. But then what do? You look at what are other people doing? Well, I know some people, they're working at these cool startups. At the time, like Shopify was still like, it wasn't a startup at that point by the traditional definition, but it was still had that cool vibe. Like I remember touring their office and like all this kind of stuff. And I'm just like, man, like I don't know if that's for me either. And then, you'd see those networking events and you'd have the Deloitte and the KPMG and the EY and all these big, massive companies or massive firms. And you're just like, wow, like, am I just going to be a cog in that machine? And then it was just like, and then I'd see other kind of like smaller businesses, and then I'd see like people starting their own businesses. I just saw all these different routes, and it's so overwhelming. You're like, what do I do? This is such a big decision. Like, whatever I kind of do now, it's gonna set up the next thing. It's like when you're in high school, and they're like, do you want to do academic or applied? Like that was a big decision. I don't know if all your listeners know what that means, but like academic or applied was like the stream of like if you're going to go to college or like university. And like some courses were a little bit more like hands on, like you wouldn't necessarily be doing a woodworking course if you're going to university for biology or something, right? So I remember having to make that decision when I was like 14 or 15, and I'm just like, this sets up the next thing and then the next thing and then the next thing. And it's just like I didn't agree with that. I didn't think that it had to be this logical step after step after step, and then you get married, and then you get the house with the picket fence, and then you buy a boat, and then you die. Like I'm just like, this is not. There's something missing here, right? And so yeah, kind of in a weird roundabout way, I just knew that I know I have no idea what I want to do, but I know what I don't want to do.
And partially you know what you don't want to do because you spent time doing what you didn't want to do. You worked in the government. You're still there, which we will talk on how the fact that you're still there. But so you get this job at the government, and how, two-pronged question. So one, how are you feeling when you get that job? Because you're kind of overwhelmed by the decision. You know you don't really want to be that guy in a suit, but you kind of end up being that person anyways. And then the second half of that question is, how does that teach you and show you this is like, because basically what I'm trying to say here is I've heard people say that by working a job you hate, it helps you figure out what you actually want to do. Because while you're doing what you hate, you're fantasizing and thinking about what you actually want to be doing. So, how do you feel when you get the job? And then how does that job help you figure out what you actually want to do?
Right. So while I was actually in university in my last couple of years, I had gotten this job through the FSWEP program. And for those who don't know, that's the Federal Student Work Experience Program. So basically, that's just a fancy way of saying while you're in university, make some money working at whatever government body or agency or whatever. And so um, I just randomly applied one day because a buddy of mine told me, he's like, dude, like I paid for my university while doing these on and off, part-time and full-time in the summer kind of gigs. And he's like, dude, you do nothing. It's like so easy. It's like great pay and all this stuff. And I'm just like, that sounds awesome. Cause at the time I was working at Shoppers Drug Mart on my feet, making like $9 an hour, like just grinding for very little pay. And so I'm like, dude, yes, I want that job. That sounds awesome. And so I got in and I got into this department for pension plan and administration. Definitely not the most exciting stuff in the world. And but it was cool. It was like, man, I'm in uni, I'm working like, 15, 20 hours a week. I'm getting paid. Like this is nice. Like I think I went up to like it was like I started off at like $18 an hour, so I already doubled my pay. And then like there were steps. So if you renew, you get up to like I got up to like 23. I was balling, man. I'm like, I got all this cash. I live at home. Like this is the best situation ever. But then the big thing with that job is what it enabled me to do was go on this exchange. And I saved so much money while I was in university to go on this international exchange, which we can definitely talk about. But when I had gotten back from that, I'm like broke. Like, and I'm like, I need a job. So what do? I go and get another F-SWEP term. And now this is kind of near the end of my university. And I'm like scrambling to kind of figure out like, do I want a job? Do I want to just continue working here? I don't know. It's like the devil, or like, should I go out and venture into the world and try to get a different job that I maybe don't particularly love? And so I ended up choosing to work there full time, get bridged in as they call it, and I've been working there since with my full time 9 to 5 job. Monday to Friday is the classic, 38 hours a week, got the pension, got the benefits, all that stuff. But kind of the second part of your question is like, being able to work somewhere where you don't want to be. Yeah, I mean, I'd be completely lying, and sorry to any of my coworkers if you listen to this. I love you guys. But it's not. I mean, everyone knows it. Anyone who's met me, they know I'm supposed to be doing something else, and I make that very clear. Now, I don't want to just completely throw shade at this place because they they've been good to me. Like they have like supported me throughout all this journey and all this kind of stuff that I'm doing. And I think people there even realize that like you're not cut out for this kind of work, but I do my job. I get all my things done. I'm not a horrible worker per se, but my big thing there is that I know it's not going to last like too long. I'm going to be transitioning out of that when it makes sense. But as of right now, it's still not a bad situation.
And so then ultimately, like from this job, from my understanding, it's when people used to ask you, like, what do you do? And you'd say what your job was, but you wouldn't feel excited to tell people. And that's kind of when the idea of starting a podcast started percolating in your head because you were listening to so many at work while you're doing different mindless tasks, whether it be inputting data or whatever it might be. And so and it's not like you had the idea for the podcast though when you started it. From my understanding, it took you about 6 to 12 months from, hey, maybe I should start a podcast to actually starting. So I'm curious if you can give the listener context. During that 6 to 12 months when you're debating, what are you learning? What are you trying to prepare during that 6 to 12 month deliberation you're having in your head?
Yeah, man, and that's a great question because at the time, like while I'm working that job, I you brought up something that's really near and dear to my heart, and it's because I listen to a lot of podcasts. I was always just listening to anything that could help pass the day when I was doing those kind of more mundane, repetitive things, right? Because again, I was like kind of I was believe I was a couple years into my job at that point, so I wasn't doing like managing a team or doing anything that needed you to be very present and active. It's like, yeah, take this data and put it in an Excel document and rename something. I'm like, okay. So I listened to so many podcasts and I had so many friends that when I hang out with them and we just chill and maybe have a drink or whatever, and I'd always get into these super deep conversations, like just really like just I've always been a very big picture, head in the clouds kind of guy. And so I always just like gravitate towards these really like I don't know, big topics. I just, I used to really have a disdain for small talk. I always wanted to get to the big talk. Let's talk about whatever and big stuff. And like, we only have one life here. Like, what do you think about aliens? And like, I'd even bring up like sensitive topics, like, how do you feel about abortion and this and that? Like, very like, I'd just want to talk about it. It was always fun for me. And people kind of told me, it's like, yo, you're really good at this. You should have like a radio show. I'm like, what are you talking about, man? I'm just talking shit here. We're just talking. What do you mean? Like, why would I do that? It's like, no, but like you're always talking about these podcasts. You're always sending these different recommendations and these different like, why don't you just start one? And I don't remember who exactly said it, but you know, it was a collection of a bunch of people who just gassed me into this idea. And I was just like, you know how it is. I'm just like, I don't know, man. But even inside, I was like, maybe there's something to it. Maybe I could, I don't know. I used to really hate my voice. I'm like, I don't, like I got such a nasally, I've broken my nose so many times. It's just like, no, why would I do that? Like, I don't, what would I even talk about? And all that kind of stuff. And then, I remember being at work one day, sitting in the cafeteria, frustrated with the work, and just talking with some of my friends at work about it. And I was like, guys, you know what, man? I'm gonna start a podcast, and you know what? This is what it's gonna be about, and this and that, blah 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 blah. And they're just like, yes, like you have to do that. Like we need you to do that. And I was just like, damn, like I didn't think they'd support the idea like that. I thought they'd just give me one of those like kind of backhanded, like, oh yeah, dude, you should definitely do that. Like one of those. They were like, no, like do this. You have to do this. And so my timeline's a little bit messy here. I'm not really sure what sequence of order, but that's I think it was like 6 months from idea to actually starting. I had just like I was doing a lot of research. I was watching YouTube videos. I was learning what equipment am I gonna need, what style of podcast. Like I don't have a studio. I'm not Joe Rogan. I don't. Where am I gonna get all these microphones? Who's gonna edit it? Like a billion questions came up, but just one at a time. I would just start securing things. I got this mic right here that I'm still using to this day off Kijiji for like $50. I got this same boom arm here off Kijiji off someone else for like, I don't know, like $100, something like that. And I just started sourcing things. I'm like, what do I need? Like minimum viable product. What do I need to start this podcast? And just started getting the things. I got really lucky. Someone was selling his Zoom H6, the audio recorder thing. And I remember hearing Pat Flynn or someone talk about that, and I'm just like, oh yeah, dude, that's the one. And like I remember Tim Ferriss recommending it, and I'm like, yes, I'm in the big leagues now. Like got that for like only $200. These things usually sell for like 600-700. Oddly enough, it was someone who's quitting his podcast. I was like, this is eerie, but thank you. And all that said, like I just gathered all the things and got enough to get started with my first like one podcast episode.
My question there though, was that 6 months of planning worth it? Because I went through a similar timeline where like I thought about my podcast for about 6 months before I started actually recording. And I found that like come time to actually sit down and record a podcast, I still wasn't ready despite 6 months of preparation. Did you find a similar thing or do you think that that 6 months was necessary?
I don't think 6 months was necessary. Definitely 3 months of those was self-doubt and telling myself, "Who do you think you are? Like, why are you even doing this? Like, you're not a what are you trying to do here, man? Who do you think you are?" And so those kinds of thoughts definitely kept creeping in. And so I'd like sometimes even just be like, man, like forget all this. Like this is just not gonna work. And so all that said, I don't think 6 months was necessary, but definitely a few months to get to figure out why you wanna do it and what you're gonna do, right? I definitely would say it's good to just jump into something and just see if you like it, as opposed to, ruminating and just thinking about it for like a year, 2 years, and just trying to get the perfect logo and the this and the setup. But you do need to do a little bit of research. Like I needed to know how this equipment works. I need to know what style of podcast I want to do. I need to know who I'm going to kind of talk to. Those kinds of things. Like you do need a little bit of time, but definitely not 6 months. I would not. If someone told me today, you want to start a podcast, I would be like, I will help you get started within this month. Like within this month, you will have a podcast live. It's not that deep.
And so talk to me about It's Not That Deep then. Bring me back to June 22nd, 2019, the day your first episode goes live. How are you feeling on that day? Talk to me about the reaction to you finally putting out this podcast. Like, bring me back.
Oh man, so it's really funny because to the world that is my first podcast, but it was actually my second, and this is the first time I've ever talked about this, really, or maybe I've talked about it a couple times. But basically, I had a podcast with a good buddy of mine, and it was a complete test run, but it wasn't intended to be. Like I came with all this equipment to his house, set up my stuff, and I was like, let's go, like let's do this thing, like I need to just get this done because I keep overthinking this first episode. And I we did that episode together and it was fun and we had a great conversation. But then when I went to go edit it after with some janky software I torrented, I remember looking at it and hearing it and I was just like, oh my god, he was swearing a lot. Like, is this what I want my first like show to the world be like, but of this podcast? Like oh my god, this is not good. And I had to break it to him and it was really tough because he was proud of it, I was proud of it, we were ready to go. And I was like, look man, like I love you and we will do this again, but I can't put that out. I can't put that out. And that was my first experience, you know what do they call it? Like killing your anyways, I didn't want to say what I was about to say, but anyways, you gotta kind of sometimes take a step back and realize, like, actually, how is this going to be perceived? And so, when I did my actual first podcast that I put live with my good friend Nashad, um, he he and I did it in my apartment, and it was a little bit more calculated. And I coached him up a little bit more about it. I had my beer with me, and I like let my calm my nerves down a little bit. I didn't even have lighting at that point, so it was legit like a construction light and it looked like garbage. But I was really proud that I just put it out anyways. I wasn't happy with it. I knew I wasn't going to be happy with it, but I just put it out anyways. And people's reaction was tremendously positive. Everybody was sharing it, everybody was supporting, everyone was cheering me on. Whether or not every single person that came across it was actually rooting for me or not, I'll never know, and it does not matter. But all the support that I did get, dude, I was like, "Oh man, this is pure validation right now. I wanna do this again. I'm gonna do another episode. I'm gonna get some lighting. I'm gonna figure this out. I'm gonna figure blah, 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 all these different things out." And, yeah.
And so talk to me then about the name of the show. I referenced it in the intro as being the aptly named podcast, and obviously it's a play on your name. And I know the meaning of it has evolved over time. Some people think it's short for It's Not That Deepak Chopra, and I know that's not the actual reason behind the name. But so today, in its current form, how do you explain why the name of the podcast is what it is?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up that it evolved a lot, and I'm very proud that it is, because I feel like I'm evolving a lot, and the people I'm around are evolving a lot, and so I don't think anything is that absolute in this world. But all that to say, it's not that deep. What that means to me now, currently, as we record this podcast today in 2020, um, it's not that deep means to me that we overcomplicate life often. To so many of the times, we're our biggest critic. We are always often in our own heads about a lot of things that most people, to be honest, are not even paying attention to or care about. And I know that's kind of a long, drawn out explanation, and it doesn't really explain what it's not that deep means. But to me, what it means is that, yo, just take a step back. It's not that serious, man. It's like a way to kind of just, it's almost serves as a reminder, and it's almost become a way that people around me and not kind of communicate a way of like, chill, man. It's like, it literally is not that deep. It does not have to be as serious a thing as you might be making it, whether it be some kind of argument, whether you're getting passionately heated about something, or whether you're even taking yourself too seriously, which we all do at certain times, right? It's just not that deep, man. It's just calm down, chill out, maybe have a drink, have a smoke, do what you need to do, and just realize we only have one life, and like make the most of it. Live it to the fullest. Have fun with it. You don't get another go of this thing. So literally those are like that's my belief system in 5 words. I guess like I'd say it's 4 words, but it's technically five. So like that's kind of my philosophy of life, is just like, dude, whatever, like it's kind of hard to put words to it, as you could kind of see right now, but that's what it is to me. And it started off as a meme that people used to send to me and stuff, and it's like, it's not that deep, bro. I love that.
Mhm. And now talk to me about your approach to actually doing these interviews. I know you and I have a very opposite approach. I'm very much, I take the time to prep and research, and you're very much on the fly. I've talked to people who've been like, I came to Jacob's house and he had the notes ready. I came to Deepak's house and he was like, what do you want me to talk about? Because you guys are like the exact, like how we're just the exact opposite when it comes to our podcasting. But I think like it plays to the strengths of the person. Like we've talked about this offline. Like that's just how I need to do my podcast. And if you tried to do your podcast the way I do mine, like it just wouldn't work for you. So talk to me about your approach and kind of, you talk about how that first podcast was more calculated. So that means like you're not just having a regular conversation, like you are actively thinking about what you're going to ask as you're doing it. It's like, what's your approach to doing the podcast and the interviews specifically?
Yeah, man. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because you and me are polar opposites in that regard. And I remember, for those listening, when I was actually first starting off my podcast, I love telling the story. Like, I actually met with Jacob for coffee and I asked him for all these pointers and tips. And he gave me so much like amazing like stuff that would apply and has applied to his podcast journey to that point. But then in very Deepak fashion, I kind of just went and did it kind of my own way anyways, because that's just, there's certain things that you can get advice from people, and even they can be close friends of yours and you can really respect them, but it has to make sense for you and your personality type. Exactly like you said, if I started prepping for podcasts the way you do, I get in my own head about, like, I have to be, I don't want to use the word a slave, but I have to adhere to this script. And if something goes off track with that script, the way my brain works, I'm going to have a very hard time coming back to what I wanted to talk to you about. So, what I found works best for me is like the original principles of what made me start a podcast, which is just those deep, open kind of conversations. And it's kind of funny that it's called It's Not That Deep, because oftentimes it does end up into those deep conversations. And so, for me, that's just how it works. I needed to kind of flow off the top of the head. I needed to be, um, and this is not me saying yours is not a genuine vibe. I'm having so much fun on this podcast right now. Like, I'm genuinely loving this format, but I could never do it. I could not do what you do. You have so much discipline not to jump in, not to interrupt, not to make it about you. I'm not good with that. I have to do all those things that I just said. I'll interrupt you. I'll tell you a story that how this relates to me. I'll one up you. I'll do all those things that you should not do as a good interviewer, as a proper podcaster. But that's just what works for me, and that's who I am. And I've learned from people like you who constantly remind me this, to lean in on that, to just be you, just be authentic, because that's what people like you for, and that's what people like your podcast for. And so I'm just gonna do that, man. I think I'm gonna take your advice this time a little bit more and just continue to remain me. But it can bite me in the ass at times. There are certain podcasts where I'm a little bit out of my element with the guest. I might not know them that well. We may not have met and established that initial rapport. They may be talking about a subject that I'm not, savvy on, or, even able to kind of speak on. And so I have to do a little bit more fishing. And so it is very useful for me now to have a couple general bullet points and a few, I do this cheap tactic where, because I'm so lazy, dude. I'm so lazy. I'll legit hit up like a good friend of a guest that I'm having on and just be like, what do you think I should ask this person? And they'll always spill beans and tell you things. And so that's that's as far as I go in being Jacob Kelly, is like, send that one text like a couple days before and just be like, yo, what should I ask? What should I ask this dude? Oh, dude, tell him about he loves to do this, or he's a vegan. Like, oh, he won't know that. I'm like, okay, cool. And I'll just bring it up in conversation randomly if I run out of things naturally to say.
I know one of your favorite part about podcasting is the documentation aspect of it. All these amazing conversations that you're having, you can't wait to look back and be like, look what I was doing in my 20s. So with that in mind, I'm curious, what conversation or two conversations are you most looking forward to right now to looking back on in 20 years?
Ooh, that's a tough one because I love them all. It's really hard to like rank it like that, right? They're so fun. Like I legitimately, each one, if I ever come across a clip or something on my social media and I'm just like, damn, like that's cool. Like that's cool, man. I got to talk to that guy. But one in particular, this is a good mutual friend of ours, Hayden Cashin. And this was episode 3 of my podcast. And the story behind that was I didn't even know Hayden before, but the first time that I met him, I had kind of told him about this, podcast that I just started. And it was just something that was just kind of still an infant, this little idea at the time. And he's like, dude, hit me up. I want to be on that, just in typical Hayden fashion, right? I'm like, okay, cool. I got a guest like lined up in a few weeks. Like, I'm pumped. And so that one's really going to be an interesting one to look back on because, as you've had him on your show many times. He's a great, great friend of yours. You guys date back. You guys are very good friends. And just knowing the type of guy he is, he's always up to something. Every time you see him, he's leveling up his mindset as well. He's growing his business. He's, growing his relationships, his social media, his everything. Everything is just growing with that guy. And he exudes that energy. Anyone who follows him at Hayden Cashin will see that he's showing you that journey. He's documenting that every day. And so anyone who's ever done a podcast with him, and he's got like a repertoire of podcasts at this point, they know that, okay, this guy is like Ottawa's Gary V. Like this guy is, he's doing shit. He's actually making things happen. And that's just a small sliver of what he's actually really about, as you and I know. And so when I look back at that podcast, that one's gonna really, really be cool to see, his growth. And then another one is the one with you, man. I really, really, really enjoyed getting to sit down and talk to you and kind of throw away all the noise and just talk podcasting, talk about our journey, talk about like things that, maybe it's not the podcast that's going to get the most shares and likes and all those vanity metrics on social media, like a Jim Watson, or, a pro athlete or something like that. But you're a dude who I genuinely look up to. And when I first met you to where you're at now, running your own business, you left your job, you set a vision for yourself, and you actually made that a reality. You've grown your podcast. You have a massive impact on so many people now. When I look back and I'm like, I had that fucking guy on my podcast. I had that guy on my corner, and he had an impact on my journey. And it's like now we're both been on each other's shows, and I just think it's gonna be so cool to look back and be like, yo, dude, like, wait, how old are you?
23.
23. Okay. I just turned 25. So imagine when we're 50, looking back and just being like, yo, dude, we were idiots. We knew nothing. Because now we think we know shit. Oh yeah, I understand podcasts. Like, imagine what podcasts are gonna be in, like, you know 2075, man. It's nuts.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I appreciate the kind words, man. I really do. That means a lot to me. And you threw me off with asking what my age was. I actually had to think about that for a second because, like, after I turned, I sometimes I forget how old I am at this point. Um, with the podcast, you talk about the podcast journey a lot because there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes with doing a podcast that people don't get to see. So hit me with one of your like top behind the scenes moments and one of your like bottom behind the scenes moments, like you forgot a memory card or you forgot to hit record or something like that. Hit me with like the best and the worst.
So one of those, I'll actually start with the bottom, and it's one of those things that you don't really like. You'll never see that kind of stuff, but when when it comes to preparing for a podcast episode, as you know, there's a lot of different things that have to happen and have to kind of go right for you to start recording. And when I have people in my apartment, in my little studio there, um, I want to be 100% present and with them when I'm with them. Like, I'm seeing them, I'm about to have them on my show, and I'm just excited to get to like vibe with them, right? Excuse me. And so I just want to do that, but at the same time, I got to be fixing all this tech and doing, like, checking audio levels and like making sure that the SD cards have enough space in them. I have to make sure that the curtains are closed, that the tripods for the cameras are set up, that the cameras are charged up, that the lighting's on, like all these things. I got a checklist of things that I got to do. Got to make sure the guest has water, that they went to the bathroom, that you ask them those pre-episode questions, that they're ready. You got to make sure they're comfortable. You're doing all these things while also being like, oh yeah, man, how's Disney World? Like, you know what I'm saying? And so sometimes you forget a couple things on that list. And so there's one time I got 20 minutes into an episode with a good friend of mine, and we went in right away. We were talking about, some of our sports injuries and identity and how much that's impacted us. And it was like almost like an emotional beginning because we played football together. He had a dramatic injury, and I had an injury that ended my career, and we were just like vibing, and we were really getting into it. And then I just look over to my left, and my brother's holding up like his iPhone or an iPad or something with like a note on it, and I'm just like looking at the corner of my eye, I'm like, you're he's like you're not like recording, or like the curtain's open or something like that. And I'm just like, oh shit, curtain was open. And then I looked down and I realized, because and for those listening, what's wrong with the curtain open is light is coming in and going directly onto the camera, which is ruining the recording. But then I also realized when I looked down, we weren't recording. I forgot to hit record on the audio recorder. So I'm just like, oh my God, like what an L. Imagine like your friend's finishing his thought and you're just like, I'm so sorry, man. We got to restart that whole thing. I just forgot to hit record. And it was fine. It worked out, but it wasn't the same raw. Like, you can't make that up. You can't be like, let's just say everything we just said for the last 25 minutes again. It's like, it sucks. And then one of the best moments too is just like, and this is not one moment, so I'm kind of cheating here on this question, but it's something that I'm kind of experiencing right now in this present moment. It's when I lose track of time. I don't even know how long we've been recording to this point. I'm just in a flow. I'm just here with you. You're here with me, even though we're not in the same room. Unfortunately, with everything going on, I'm here. I'm here. I'm present. I'm with you. And there's nothing I'd rather be doing right now. That is one of the most exhilarating parts of podcasting, and it's why I can see myself doing this for the rest of my life, is because it's not work for me. It's literally, I'm just talking. I didn't prep a script. I wasn't nervous going into this, like, per se, I wasn't stressing about it. It's just flow. It's just fun.
And one thing too, like kind of based off what you're talking about, I wish I could have like just bring carry the mics with me at all times. And whenever I'm with a friend, I'm just like, yo, here's a mic, let's do a podcast. Cause people open up and get so much deeper on a podcast than an everyday conversation. And it's like I've had like extremely deep conversations with complete strangers that I'm meeting for the first time on my podcast than I've ever had with good friends of mine, just because the podcast creates that environment. But
Yeah. Can I ask you a question
yeah,
about that right there? So, do you ever find that even you yourself as a podcast host, that you almost don't have those conversations with people who you know you're gonna have like on your show or something, because you're almost like, let's save it for the show. Like, do you ever do that? Is that something that's ever like crossed your mind?
it has a little bit. Like, for example, like, I've had a couple people where I didn't actually know if I was going to have them on the podcast or not before, but I met them for coffee. Jamie Lee being one of them, Jordan McDonald being another, and like we're having these really good conversations. I'm like, and like halfway through the conversations, like I know I want this guy on my podcast, but I don't want to just stop the vibe of our like good interaction that we're having, so I just kind of let it go. But for the most part, like my interaction with guests is pretty minimal beforehand, so I don't have to worry about that too often now.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
really interesting.
yeah, one thing you said too as you were recording and your brother was holding up like a note to you, but you moved out of your house, your parents' house before you started the podcast. That means your brother's there just helping you out, and you've done a lot of work of outsourcing a lot of the stuff with your podcast. So you pretty much just have to worry about sitting down and having the conversations. And why have you done that? Because as of right now, the podcast isn't making money technically, like podcast directly. Like, of course, there's probably residuals to the business and stuff, but the podcast itself is not making any money. So you're just coming straight out of pocket to outsource these different elements of your podcast so you don't have to worry about them. Why do you do that?
To me, the more important currency than money is time. And I don't want to spend time doing things I don't enjoy doing. That would be the short answer right there. Period. Full stop. I just don't. I don't enjoy editing. I don't enjoy, some of the other things associated with podcasts and promoting them and getting them out there and chopping up clips and putting up subtitles and all that kind of stuff. And I don't want that message to be lost in that um I wouldn't do those things. Like, if that was just a situation and if I didn't have money tomorrow, I would go back to doing it. I would edit. I taught myself all those things. I know how to do all of them at a good enough proficiency to get it out. I'm not an expert. I don't want to be an expert. I don't want to learn about every aspect of videography and editing and lighting and all these things. It just doesn't interest me that much. I'm interested in the conversation and the content more than anything. But to kind of give you a little bit more there, like my thing is like, if I can more efficiently use my time, and if I can get to a point where yeah, I'm spending money on having my brother and some other people on my team edit and get this stuff distributed and promoted. If I could spend that money, and if I could save 10 hours a week or 8 hours a week or something like that, and use that time to either make more money or make more podcasts or make more content, or do even just hang out and chill. Like, if I bought that time, and just the type of person I am, I fill up my time with so much stuff that I'm doing anyways. I'm not really worried about this kind of minimal investment, which to some might be big, but to me is this like, it's going to pay off in the future. It literally will. I've told you this many times. Like, I have so much belief in It's Not That Deep podcast and all these different ventures, that I'm not really like, money's not really my compass. It's not really the thing that drives me or my decision making any way. It's like time is. If I can unlock those 10 hours, dude, what I could do with those 10 hours fires me up way more than if you paid me an extra, like, whatever dollars to, but then you have to go edit the stuff. It's like, I don't enjoy doing that. So it doesn't even make sense.
Your podcast isn't as consistent as it once was. Does that, I mean, obviously you have so many things on the go, but does that bother you at all?
It bothers me a lot. It really, really does. If it were up to me, Jacob, I would put out 2 podcasts a day. I feel like I don't really get tired of this, the act of shooting a podcast. That's really just fun and easy. The harder part is um the promotion than anything of a podcast and the distribution of it. The editing of it, it can get done, but it's like there's still a high level of involvement from me in terms of what I want to put out. And I still have a very high level of control on what I want to put out. And so, like you mentioned, when I'm kind of doing all these other things, unfortunately, something has to give. And I never wanted to be the guy who would do seasons and like take a long break between my podcast and then go do these other things and then go batch out my podcast. And I always kind of wanted to be somewhat current. I wanted it to always be somewhat kind of um not robotic. Like not to say that people who have a consistent schedule are robotic, but just for me, it's just whenever I got time, whenever I'm gonna throw it out, it's almost just like, here you go. Like I just slide a podcast to you. But I'm going to be very soon getting back to the once a week schedule. I have like 6 in the can recorded. Like I have a bunch of content. It's just the distribution of it, the social media, getting it out, promoting it, giving everyone their fair chance to promote it before moving on to the next one. And all these different things. But yeah, to answer your question, man, I want to be way more consistent. I want to pour a lot more gas on this podcast fire, but I've opted for maybe don't do it as much, but make sure you're still doing it. So that to me, I'm more proud of that I've still been able to keep putting out an episode or two or three a month, as opposed to just being like, I'm taking a break. See you guys in July, because I'm too fucking busy to give content. Um, so it's not ideal, but with the situation right now, I think I've navigated it in a decent way. It does bother me. So I will say that for the record. If it were up to me and I had all the resources, I'd have a podcast studio and I do this shit live. I do like 2 or 3 a day. I'd get way more guests. I have like ideas for like 20 or 30 or like so many different formats. Like I want to do like a debate type of show. I want to do like a live show. I want to do like ones with like 4 or 5 guests, just a shit show. I want to do like all kinds of stuff, man. But time. I haven't been able to buy all of it back yet. Coming back to having that job, right? So that's just the situation right now. But it is also important to keep it into perspective that this has always been a long-term journey. All those things may come, but they won't come overnight.
I want to ask you about your goal for the podcast, but I don't want to do it by just straight up asking. I have 3 quotes of yours written down that I want you to give a little more context on to kind of build out kind of not necessarily your goal, but your approach and your long-term vision for the podcast. First one is not every hobby has to make money.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting thing. And in terms of hobbies, right? It's like if it's something that just gives you joy, if it's something that you just enjoy doing with your time, you don't have to monetize it, man. It does not have to be like art and business are in a constant battle. They're in constant friction. It's very hard to marry the two. We've all met people who are ultra creatives who don't have a business like cell in their body. And then we've met people who are business minded gods, but couldn't produce art if, like, like if they're tied to the wall. Like if they had to create some kind of art, they wouldn't be able to do it. So um, to me, it's like if you got a hobby, you got something that is fun for you, if you can monetize it and you want to monetize it, go for it because then it's going to fund it, right? And now, if your time is funded, go ahead. But that doesn't mean you have to. No one's putting a gun to your head and saying your podcast has to be this absolutely, um, you know, Joe Rogan level, like, producing $100 million and this and that, blah, 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 blah. But, if you want to offset some of the costs, there's nothing wrong with that either. But there's also nothing wrong with just being like, you know what? This is just a release for me. This is just fun. This is just breaking up my day. This is just something I want to do. I want to paint. I want to box. I want to, whatever it is, man, do it. Just do it for the sake of doing it.
Podcasting isn't a competition. just because you start one doesn't mean I'm losing. We can all win.
1000%, man. We're living in 2020 where it's the era of collaboration. It's the era of working together. And you don't have to be and besties with every person you come across. But the real currency nowadays is relationships. And that's a quote, I believe, from Naval Ravikant, someone I really look up to. And it's so true, man. It's like, it's not a zero sum game. Just because you started a podcast doesn't mean like my podcast is any less. It's not like traditional media, it is kind of a zero sum game where if you get a slot at 8 p.m. on a Thursday night for a sitcom, that's the slot. There's not a million slots. That's the slot. And so because my sitcom is in there, yours has to get bumped. Podcasting is the opposite of that. It's like the more of us who adopt the platform, the more people who have a podcast, the more people who work together on podcasts, the more people who normalize podcasts in general and opt for podcasts as opposed to radio or traditional media, we all win. It's like, it's just better for all of us because more people are going to be exposed to it. We can work together. And just generally speaking, it's just, I mean, I could talk about this forever, but podcasting, it doesn't have those um restrictions. It doesn't have those, that feeling of someone's telling me what I have to say. Like, I didn't even like know if I'm allowed to swear on your podcast, but I just did it anyway. And I'm just like, yo, Jake's cool. Like he'll be fine with it. But if I was on like CBC radio and I was speaking the way I am right now, it wouldn't make it to air. You know what I'm saying? So it's just that freedom, I think, is really one of my core beliefs, and I think it translates into something like a podcast very well. And that's why I just think that anybody can start one and everybody should if they want to. And it's not a competition, man. We're all winning.
The last quote I have from you here is, I'm not trying to be Joe Rogan. I'm trying to be myself.
100%, man. um a comparison is the thief of joy, right? Like, by constantly being like, oh, I wish I was like Jacob, I wish I was like Joe Rogan, I wish I had a Tim Ferriss podcast, Shane Parrish, like I wish I had that. You're already in a losing position. You already lost because now you made up this weird scenario in your head where um you think that you're like you have even similar life experiences, or you're even same, like similar to that person. Like, you're not. You can only like, you can only be yourself. Like, that's all you can really be the best at. So I just want to be the best me I can be. And like, if someone compares me to someone, I will take it gracefully, and that's awesome. Thank you very much. But I will never be a color commentator. I don't even do martial arts. Like, I don't, like all these different things. Like, so why even like try to fit yourself? That's acting. Like, that's playing a character. That's not being true and authentic to yourself. You know, I would hate to lie to myself. Like, if I'm lying to me, then I'm just lying to the world. Then I'm just like, I'm building a house on a very shaky foundation. And I think it's more important to just, be you, be the unique version of you. And I know it's so cliche, and I know everyone says it, and I know we draw inspiration from a lot of people, but it's just so much more fun and easy to just like be you, man.
Now, changing gears a little bit here, talk to me about deep digital media. Earlier in the podcast, we talked about how you said that earlier in your life, you thought people were born entrepreneurs or they weren't. And you thought you were one of those people that wasn't born an entrepreneur. But clearly, you're proving yourself wrong here with your actions right now. So, when did you start to get the idea and like the urge to start your own business?
Well, something you mentioned earlier, when I decided to outsource a lot of the, painful, at least to me, parts of podcasting, I started to realize that there's probably something here. There's probably a lot more people who have this same pain, the same problem, and a lot of people who might not even realize that they have this problem yet, or that they will have this problem when they start their own podcast or whatever. And so it was just a very like, at first I'm just like, you know what, I think it'd be I think it'd be cool to see if I can get some, clients. And as I've talked to, we've in our circle of influence and people like Hayden and Mallory and all these people that I've met who have built their own business and work for themselves. um I really did learn that it's possible. Like through the podcast, I learned that it's not this impossible feat. I'm not trying to build this multinational, like next level crazy app that's going to change the world or cure cancer or anything. I just need a few clients paying me X dollars, and then that's you have a business, right? And you're in that list as well because you've actually gone and done it. But kind of going back to it, I'm like, well, why can't I help like busy business owners and professionals like kind of start and manage and grow their own podcast? It's a painful thing. Like, why don't I do that? And so went on LinkedIn, just started messaging a bunch of people, sending voice notes. Very weird thing. Don't do that. But it just kind of worked for me. But I just message a bunch of people and like be like, hey, like, do you want to start a podcast and like this and that? I can help you out with it. Here's my podcast. Here's some social proof, blah, 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 blah. And I had a really hard time doing sales because I just didn't know anything about sales and I wasn't closing anybody. And I was just realizing that trying to sell people on the idea of a podcast without them already having a podcast is like a loser's game. Like I'm coming into this already losing. So my first like 3-4 months like running my business, I had no idea what I was doing, and I was just taking so much rejection every day that it was starting to beat me down. But I just remembered hearing from so many people that that's what you got to do, and you got to adapt and adjust. And long story short, I basically realized that I should help people who already have a podcast kind of manage their stuff because they know the pain. They need someone to help do this, and so that's where I've seen a little bit more success. And then kind of with some of the more video production and content creation, that kind of stuff, that's where I've leaned into a little bit more, and it's been good. But coming back to what you asked about, like regarding like the entrepreneurship thing, I still have that imposter syndrome. I still feel that who am I? What am I doing? Like who do I think I am? Like on these calls and closing these contracts and doing these kinds of things. I'm like, who am I? Like what am I doing? But you just got to keep going. I'm like I will get better. Like I will figure out exactly what it is that people need and how I can bring the most value. And we're getting there. I'm getting a lot closer to figuring out what that is. But I don't think I'll ever wake up one day and just be like, I am an entrepreneur. I have it completely figured out, and the rest of my life is peaches and roses. Like I don't think that's ever gonna happen. So kind of like something that Hayden, Gary Vee, a lot of these people talk about a lot is like just loving the process. And I'm kind of loving it. Like I love the dirt. I used to just say that to pay it lip service because I hated it. I'm like, this sucks. Why would anyone like this? But now I'm kind of like waking up excited. Like this is dope, man. Like what's today's challenges? What fire am I gonna put out? Like how am I gonna manage this team or my own emotions or my own you know you know goals and ambitions and my job and relationships and all these different crazy things that are interconnected. How am I going to deal with that today? And I think I've done an okay job so far, but I have a lot of room for growth.
And you mentioned how you started out exclusively as a podcasting agency, but over time that's shaped, that's evolved, and your agency is different now. And I'm curious if you could share the story about getting your first video client, because there's a past podcast guest that came to talk to you and they're like, hey, do you do video? And with not doing video in any way, shape, or form, you went, yes, absolutely. And that's how you got your first video client. So could you kind of talk about how that came to be and how you made that work? Because and why you said yes in the first place with not actually knowing if you could actually pull off the video thing. You just said yes and did it.
So it's really funny. It was one of the clients of mine is actually a guest I had on the podcast, Tony Greco, and I think you should have him on yours as well. I'd love to set that up. I think that needs to happen. I think it'd be really cool. But I had him on my podcast over a year ago, and I remember when I started this business, he was on my list of like people to hit up to start their own podcast. And I remember I grabbed a coffee with him, and this was early winter last year. And I grabbed a coffee with him, and Tony's always been a great guy. I always liked his vibe and energy. He's always been a very uplifting, motivating dude. And so I met him for coffee, and he was like, it's like this was my first like actual proper like business pitch coffee, right? And I remember talking to him about the podcast idea, and just nothing was really there. He didn't like seem to care that much. Like he was like, "Yeah, but like, how does this make money?" And Tony won't mind me telling the story because it's just it's so Tony and I love it. But he was just like, yeah, like like tell me the ROI on this stuff, and I could not answer that question because like, how do you measure the ROI of a podcast? Like, you kind of don't. It's such a long term play, and all that to say, it did not close Tony on a podcast that day. But he called me a couple months later when and all this COVID stuff happened, and he's like, I have an opportunity. Do you do videos, right? I'm like, yeah, I do videos. I do not do videos, bro. I don't do videos. I put my camcorders on a tripod and hit record for my podcast. That's my level of doing video. And so I'm like, of course I do video. So obviously what do? I call up a buddy of mine. I'm like, do you want to do this contract? Like, help me out. This price, blah, blah, blah. And so I tell Tony, yeah, we're good to go, blah, blah, blah. We get the contract with the city of Ottawa. It's pretty solid. I was really happy about it. And this was my first foray into running a team, having, subcontractors, getting things done, being like a creative director, going on site, getting shoots done, making sure things are edited correctly, making sure all the descriptions are on point, getting a website made from another friend of mine. And just, I realized that I will probably never be the guy who's the videographer. I will probably never be the photographer, the editor, the web designer, the SEO guy, or any of those things. But I think my superpower a little bit more is like bringing those people together and like making a project happen. And it's still very early in my business, and I can't say that I have done this again and again for many years, and I've built an extremely strong business model on this yet. So take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. I'm still very new to this, but I do know what I am good at. And making these projects happen and bringing everyone together is something that I really enjoy. I'm having a lot of fun with it, and it's giving me, now that we've got a lot more clients now, it's giving me a lot more of a kind of business cap on my head where I feel like, okay, maybe it's a good thing I'm not the one doing the videography because I still cap um, my how much I can make with time. But when I'm sitting back and kind of just coordinating things, there's kind of no limit to what I can do there. And then you're just creating more and more leverage. And so I'm just having a lot of fun with it. That's the most important um, measure for me is like when I wake up and I'm pumped, I'm like just excited. Like, what are we going to do today? Like, and because it's like the work itself is not fun. It sucks. There's a lot of disappointment, emotions, a lot of things that go on behind the scenes that are not fun, and but that's fun, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And so we talked earlier about how you're still working your full-time job while running this agency. And part of that reason is not that, like you just said, you're getting more and more clients, like the list of your clients is growing all the time. But you take so much of that money that you're making and you're reinvesting it into the business. You're focused on growing the business before you're taking that jump yourself into full time. Why are you doing that? Why aren't you making the jump and then freeing up 40, 38 hours a week like you said and then reinvesting all that time into the business?
Yeah, and it's because some of my longer term goals are to be able to travel the world and work from anywhere in the world. And so something that's really important for me is to build up enough of a cushion so that I could go 6 months and not even need to work and just be able to explore and create and travel and have fun and taste and experience things without feeling that I have to work. I have to clock in somewhere. And something that people don't realize is even if you start a business and even if you kind of quit your job and are working for yourself and doing all that, you're still working, you're still clocking in, you're still doing a job, you're still like your boss just changed. Your boss is now a client that can fire you. So I'm trying to build as big a buffer as possible so that I have as much freedom as possible when coronavirus is done, when my torn Achilles heals up, when all these things happen, that I can I can transition without feeling like I have to come back. And that might be a mental thing, that might just be something that maybe I've been ready to do make that jump for a while now, but right now I'm able to manage those things, and until I'm no longer able to do that, I'll just keep going this route, and take a page out of the Jacob playbook and not take on more clients. Like, that's something that I'm able to do, and that's fine while I refine and figure things out and what I want to do in the future and build more content and maybe a course and this and that. Like, it's just, I know I'm not giving you a very clear, straight answer to this, and it's all off also because I haven't completely figured it out myself, to be completely honest. But I do think that it'd be a smart thing for me, especially right now where nothing's really going on. I'm not going anywhere. Um, no one's really going anywhere. To just put my head down and build that buffer for the life that I know I'm destined to live.
And so, what does your day to day or even like your week look like with working all day while doing the agency, while also doing your podcast, while trying to figure out time, like you said, to build that course? Like, what does your schedule look like right now?
Yeah, so I wake up around 5:30 to 6 a.m. every day. Um, I meditate for 10 minutes, get in the shower, I read some affirmations out loud, I drink my coffee, start the day pretty slow. When I was able to walk before I had this boot on, I'd go for a little walk, maybe ground myself in the earth. And all this stuff sounds so woo woo and so straight out of some spiritual book. But I think morning are a really important time of solitude and just prime myself for the day. And that's been the most dramatic thing that kind of I credit to doing all these kind of things. And um I wouldn't recommend it to people to try to put on so much on your plate that you feel you have to do this stuff or you're just going to lose it all. But I feel like I have to do that stuff. And I journal in the morning, set my intentions, get ready for the day. And then I log into work at my government job, and I finish whatever work that I need to get done for that day at that time. I'll take a little break. Maybe that's when I'll work on some of my business stuff. I might plan some podcast stuff. Lunchtime, I don't take a lunch time. I use that as business time. And then a couple more hours in the day, I might have some meetings at my job, stuff like that. As soon as I'm done work, I that's when I schedule podcasts, sales calls with clients, coffees, all those kinds of things that technically I'm not, should not be doing, even though I'm working from home. And then after that, I'll try to get a workout in the evening at the gym. Hashtag accountability check. And then in the evening, eat dinner, kind of unwind, do a little more work, watch some courses and do some learning, do some reading, that kind of stuff. And then if I need to get some work done, I'll get some work done kind of later into the night. But I prefer not to do that. It's just not, I'm not optimal. My brain juice is zapped by that point, and then I'll be in bed at 11 every night.
And so, what does client acquisition look like for you? Like you said early on, it was sending those audio messages on LinkedIn. Is it all coming through referral now? Like, how is that working for you?
Right now, it's all referral. I have turned off my outbound strategy of trying to acquire clients, and it's I'm actually going to credit my business coach Mallory Rowan. Right now, I started working with Mallory a couple months ago, and it's made a dramatic improvement in my ability to actually think like a business more than just a freelancer. And I've done a lot of kind of these courses and kind of like learning about how to actually build a proper business. And so Mallory's helped me a lot with that. She basically gave me the system and taught me that the type of person I am, I need to lean in on being me and putting out content that excites me, and people are going to come to me a lot more naturally, and that I don't actually need that many clients to get to where I want to be. And so um it's been a lot more of a take your foot off the gas, stop trying to run in 50 different directions. She has this course, I'll plug it, Building Without Burnout. Everyone should check that out because she has burnt out before, and I was seeing signs of myself like kind of already getting there. So I had to kind of pull back, and I'm like, what is going to bring the most value? And she's kind of taught me that the type of person you are, you're going to get a lot of business just from being you, and kind of more inbound and referrals. But for that, I also, and this is something I need to work on, I need to own being like the kind of the podcast guy, or like the content guy, or like whatever, a little bit more, so that it's known to people on these social media platforms that this is what I do and this is how I can help them. So in a roundabout way, that's kind of been um, what I'm focusing on a little bit more right now. It's to put my head down and build, and put out more value for people. I want to explore more with TikTok and stuff like that as well. But I have really like throttled outbound outreach and cold emailing and cold calling and all that stuff, because I've just found that while I'm in this phase of still even figuring out my own business and my offer and all this kind of stuff, it's it's not yielding the most results for me right now.
So you mentioned with Mal, you're working with a business coach. Also, correct me if I'm wrong on the timelines here, but I believe after starting your business while doing your podcast for almost a year, if not over a year at that point, you went back to school and did a digital marketing certificate. And I know you've taken other online courses in the past. So you spend a lot of your money on these courses and having a business coach. Why do you spend your money there?
I think it's code to get things, to get to where I want to be a lot faster. Um, I see people who are doing the things that I want to be doing, and whatever money it is to pay within reason, and sometimes outside of reason, for some of these coaching and programs and stuff. Um, I just think that that's not a waste of money. That's not going to the bar and blowing it on a bottle of Ace of Spades. It's directly investing it back into me. And if I really do believe that I'm betting in me in the long run, and if I really do like actually genuinely believe that I'm building this brand, and and building myself up to be able to build other people up in the future, then I need all the learning I can get. I need to soak up as much knowledge as I can. It was something I felt kind of insecure about when I started my business, that I would have these calls with CEOs and like high level executives and decision makers, and I wouldn't really understand what SEO or SEM was, or like I didn't even have like a surface level understanding of Google Ads. And like I knew Hayden did like digital advertising, but like I thought that was like hitting boost on a post. Like I didn't know the back end of Facebook. I didn't know landing pages. I didn't know I didn't even know content marketing was a field. And like I'm a podcaster, like how silly is that? And so I wanted to take a step back, and this is not something I'd recommend to everybody, but um I wanted to get a broad knowledge of a lot of things, because of the role that I feel like I bring as like kind of a facilitator, like a high level thinker, like not really, I mean, you definitely sense this theme in me that I'm not working on the low level stuff. I outsourced that before it even made sense to do that. And so I'm like, how can I know a lot about, or a little about a lot of things? And then in that, find that one thing that I can go deep on and become that expert or whatever on that thing. And so that was the route I went. That I like to learn from people where I want to be at. I like to invest in learning in ways that make sense to me. We've already talked about what doesn't make sense for me, like sitting in a classroom and just like having that style of learning. Uh, and and so I found stuff that kind of did work for me a little bit better. And so it's still a constant Like, I love learning. I think it's very important to love learning, and we're forever learning, but I just don't necessarily love school per se, or the structures that we have set up currently.
This next question might surprise some of the listeners based off of just everything you've got going on. But are you lazy?
Oh yeah, dude. I am so lazy. I'm a tactful lazy person. So I will go through great lengths to make sure that I don't have to do something that I don't want to do. And laziness is like kind of like a fun word that we use to describe that. Maybe by traditional definitions, I'm not like a couch potato playing video games, smoking weed or whatever. Maybe I'm not that kind of lazy, but I am very lazy in that I will take the shortcut to get something done more efficiently if it's yields the same result. Again, it comes back to it's not that deep. Like, we have this one life. We really have finite time on this earth. Why spend it doing shit you don't like to do? It always really just comes back to that compass of just like, yo, I don't love doing certain repetitive things. I find if I have to even do something like 2 or 3 times in a row, I'm like, "Wow, this sucks. I can't do this." And so I don't even know, like, how people work in, like, factories and those kinds of things where you're doing kind of the same stuff. So I just feel like if I could get someone else to do it more efficiently and pay them money, which motivates a lot of people, here's some money to do this thing, and I'll just go do some other thing that is probably of higher value to me. Even if it's not higher value with money right now, that's kind of just my method of laziness. It's just like I'm just optimized for my own joy and happiness in the current state at all times.
Do you ever struggle with turning the agency off? And what's your approach to balance with that in mind?
I'm gonna need you to elaborate a little bit more. I don't really know what you mean by the agency off. Like, is it always on for you?
Yeah, so it's just like if you've done so for example, say like there's always going to be more work to be done. At
Okay, I
all
get
there's
what you mean.
always going to be more. Can you ever take that time just to pause for a minute when you've been working all day? You have a never-ending to-do list. How do you step away from it? How do you know when it's the right time to just take a break?
Yeah, this is something I struggle with, Jacob. Especially as you know, certain some clients will be a lot needier and need a lot more like they need you to hold their hand and make things feel like everything's going to be okay, and have extremely stringent deliverables and get things done at a certain time. And I think what I've gotten a lot better at is with that routine that I described to you, is like if it was something that had to get done and it didn't get done in that time period, there's a reason why it didn't, and I have to then go back and look at why it didn't. And but that's not going to come at a cost of everything else. So I told you that I do allow myself that little buffer at night to get those straggling things done if I have to. But I more often than not don't, because I've learned on my own podcast from so many people that that is how you burn out. That is how you when you work for yourself, the work never ends. And so in prepping for working for myself, I have set kind of hard rules and self police myself, and that, yo, is this going to be here tomorrow, and can I get this done tomorrow? And is everything going to fall apart if I don't get this done by tomorrow? If I answer those questions and like everything's gravy, it's going to be sitting there tomorrow. It doesn't have to be done by tomorrow, and nothing's on fire, then I'll do it tomorrow, dude. But if it's like a client who has a podcast going out at 5 a.m. tomorrow and it hasn't been edited yet, and you need a cover art and you need to distribute it, you need to get all the right description and everything all done for it. If that's not done, I am like, this is where I'm not lazy, but I will personally get that done. I will make sure at all costs that that is done for the client, because you don't really recover that well from that. You can recover very well from that first type of task that I was telling you about, where like you wanted to get it done, but it didn't, but it's okay. Like literally no one cares. So just I kind of operate with that kind of filter and really have like hard rules for like, yo, 10 p.m., it doesn't matter. I'm out. Like I better have gotten whatever needed to get done that day done, and if not, delegate it to get it done.
Around 16, 17 months ago is when you and I would have met for the first time, met up at Happy Go Coffee here in Ottawa. Have you ever taken a moment to stop and just look back and reflect on everything you've accomplished since that point? And I'm not saying like because of the conversation, I'm just using that as a reference point for the amount of time that's passed, like how much you've done in the last since you've started your podcast.
Honestly, man, I have a really hard time doing this. I'm just such a forward-looking person who's always thinking about the next thing, the next challenge. And I struggle with something called the arrival fallacy, which is thinking that when X happens, then I'll be happy or then I'll get this and why. And I've been doing a lot of work internally to figure out why that is and why like I'm wired that way, because it's not necessarily a good thing. It might manifest in good ways. Like it might like in might show as a positive thing, like, oh, like look, Deepak's doing this, this, and this, like whatever. I know no one actually says that, but let my ego win this one. But I have recently, with my birthday just passing last week, I took that day and I made it a reflection day. And I legit just sat back and I wrote down on a piece of paper like all the things that I'm proud of that I've accomplished, all the things that um I like all the ways I've grown and stuff, and some of the highs, like some of the accomplishments and some of the things that, yo, you know what, give yourself a little bit of a pat on the back. It's okay to like congratulate yourself a little bit. Don't go overboard with it, because that's when you just become that obnoxious guy. Look at me, look at this award, look at this thing. But I think it is important to recognize a little bit that I have recorded 50, almost 60 episodes now of the show. I have kept it relatively consistent. I've gotten some amazing guests on, and I've done that all while holding a job, while dealing with a lot of my own personal stuff, while, you know, figuring out what the fuck I want to do with my life. So I did give myself, I'm not gonna lie, like I said the whole day, I gave myself like an hour or two to sit and maybe go for a walk and reflect on that. But here's why I'm a psychopath. I came back and I was really disappointed with just that being the end of the story. If I got hit by a bus tomorrow, I'm like, this is not it. This is such a sad story. And I didn't get to do what I believe is my why, which is realizing my potential and realizing potential overall. And so with that being said, I'm like, okay, what has to change? What do I have to do? What's next? What's this next year? And so I obsessively then planned what I want to do and what I want to change. And I switched my Instagram username again. I redid my whole website. I just sat down and I went like completely just destroyed everything. And I'm like, no, we're going back to the drawing board. How can I improve? How can I adapt? How can I make this cleaner? No, you know what? You need an email list. No, you know what? You got to start blogging. So I wrote a blog. And that's just how I'm wired. It's not a good thing. It's definitely not healthy, but it's just how I get shit done. It's like that internal, you fat slob, you do 20 more push-ups. That's just what gets me going. And it's not healthy. I don't recommend it to people, but I do think we need to have a little bit more of that.
I have one question before we get into kind of like those wrap up standard questions. And it starts with another quote from you. I can't remember where I got this, but I wrote it down. And the quote is, I'm not successful, but I will be. Where
Mm.
does that self belief and confidence come from?
I know where you got that. That came from one of my first solo podcast episodes, and I know you do those as well. But um, I call that journey to success, and I I believe like in my bones, like I'm not just saying this, and this is gonna come off so egotistical and like like self, like almost arrogant, whatever you want to call it, no problem. But if you're listening to this point, you'll see that I'm a I'm a complex individual with a lot of different things going on, and I want to do a lot with this one life that I have. And I just know that I will be successful. Now, if we want to define successful, that means so many different things to so many different people. When I love that word because like when you say success to someone, they get this image in their own mind. They project what success is to them. To some people, that's that massive mansion and the Ferraris and the private jets and the yachts and the this and that. To other people, it's sitting on a mountain and just having no possessions and just living this minimalist life with no attachment. I think I'm somewhere in between, though that spectrum, right? And to me, like what success really means is just those four freedoms, man. The freedom of time, the freedom of money, the freedom of relationships, the freedom of purpose. Those four things, if I can achieve those, I'm not reliant on, one employer to make money. I'm not, I don't depend on one relationship to feel happy. I'm not like I'm not attached to only one purpose or one thing that I need to do and then that's it. I won, like life check, leveled up to the level 100 and I'm done. And freedom of time, as we've talked about so many times today, like I just want to be able to do whatever the fuck I want when I want. That to me is success. And that's just inevitable, bro. There's no way I don't reach that success. Like that already happened in my mind. Time just hasn't caught up yet. And that's so woo woo. And it's so like, you got these people talking about quantum physics and, spirituality and the universe and energy and all this stuff. And it sounds so like, what is this guy on? What is he trying to sell me? But there's something to it, man. There's definitely something to what you put out into the world. You do get back one way or another. And that's where that confidence comes from, man. I know, like I just that already happened. Like I already got all that. So I just live my life that way where it's like I'm not even worried about being successful, but I want to document the journey because I think it's unfortunate when people become super successful and they just write it like a autobiography or something, or like they make a little polished documentary series about it. Nothing about my life is polished, man. If you go directly to my website, the first thing you're going to see is my story about hitting rock bottom. And here's another like part of that story, bro. I got this boot on, I tore my Achilles. I might not be able to fucking walk and shit for a year, but I'm not even like tripping about it. It is what it is. I'm gonna come back from that, and it's just all part of the journey. And like I'm glad we documented that, because I'm gonna look back and you're gonna look back and you'll be, oh yeah, you remember you did my podcast, you broken leg, all this shit. It's beautiful. It's amazing. We can always go back and capture this.
I love it. I love it. And before I let you go, I'm gonna hit you with the same standard set of questions I ask everyone at the end of every interview. But before we get to those questions, I'm gonna ask you the same questions you asked me at the end of your podcast. So try and do these kind of rapid fire if we can. We'll see how it goes. But what podcasts do you listen to?
Okay, I listened to the Knowledge Project podcast by Shane Parrish. He's here in Ottawa, by the way. I listened to Tim Ferriss's podcast. I listened to Joe Rogan podcast here and there. I listened to Joey Diaz podcast. I think he changed the name now. Bill Burr is someone I used to listen to a lot. Monday morning. Bill Burr. There's a few more, but yeah, those are pretty much the main ones, and I got some other ones in rotation. Uh, but yeah,
What superhero would you be?
ooh, I think I'd be Hulk, man. I think I'd be the Hulk, just because there's a side of me that's just this kind, compassionate, caring person, but then I can also go ape shit on you know like that's why I was good at football. That's why I have this fire in me. Yeah.
What's your favorite way to unwind after a long day?
You caught me during this 75 hard thing I'm doing right now where I'm completely sober. I'm Zen monk mode, and unwinding at the end of a day. I'm so lame, but it's just reading reading a few chapters of a book, man. It's so I look forward to it. I don't watch TV anymore. It actually like I don't like staring at screens too much before bed. Like it's just I'm nerding out on all this stuff, but it's just so great to just unwind by reading a book, getting lost in it, and just falling asleep. But my real answer when I'm not completely in this mode is like I'll have a little bit of whiskey. I might hit a hookah with some friends, maybe even smoke a little joint. I'm not a big smoker, but maybe eating like a gummy edible or something just completely melt. That's crazy Deepak. That's who like operates most of the year, but caught me during a detox.
Who's your biggest role model?
Oof. Biggest role model. Man, you know what? I really like Dwayne The Rock Johnson. I just like how he's a guy who can connect anybody in the world. I haven't met a single person who has a negative thing to say about the guy. He's just this ultra positive, big ass dude who embodies discipline, makes a fuck ton of money, has fun with his life, does whatever he wants, and is just exudes what I would want to exude into the world, which is just this message of like, let's have fun with it. Let's go do big, fun, hype shit.
Kind of switching over to the questions I normally ask, and I'm sure The Rock might come up here again. But if you're going to dinner, you can take three people, anybody dead or alive. Who do you take to dinner?
I'd love to take Joe Rogan out to dinner. It'd be great to pick a guy like that's brain when he's always picking other people's brain. I think that would be really cool. Naval Ravikant, I mentioned him again. That dude just, if anyone's still listening to this point, the podcast that I listen to most that I go back, like I don't listen to podcasts or read books or watch movies twice. That's very much not my personality. There's only one exception of all media that I make an exception for. It's Naval Ravikant's collection of all his tweet storm on how to get rich without getting lucky. And it's like this 3 hour collection of this tweet storm that he did where he talks about all of his philosophy and everything when it comes to winning in 2020. And if you listen to that, you'll realize that I stole a lot of how I live my life from that because it just resonates with me so well and I've listened to it so many times that it just programs me and it's how I want to be. And third, man, Jimi Hendrix. I think that'd be really cool to just go to dinner and just like download a Jimi Hendrix and just figure out like what he was on and like he was just on such a different wavelength of fucking making that kind of music and just being on LSD and all these different drugs and just tripping out and just dying such a unfortunate early death. But I'm not a huge I used to listen to classic rock a bit more when I was younger, but not anymore. But Jimmy was big.
What's the best advice you've ever gotten?
I don't know, man. This is like it's such a simple question, and it's the hardest one for me to answer right now. I don't know. I guess I guess the best advice I've gotten from someone is not to take advice. And it's kind of funny because I now give that advice and it just works in this weird way. So that's my kind of cop out answer. But someone did give me that. And I remember it stuck with me because I tell everyone that now. It's like, yo, do you have any advice for me? It's like, don't take advice, bro. Just.
What is one thing about you that people wouldn't expect?
uh, huh. People wouldn't expect. I've never had a girlfriend.
All right.
Yeah.
It's I didn't know that. I did
Yeah.
not know
Most people
that.
don't. That's why. Yeah.
Good answer to the question.
Yeah.
What is one thing that's so important everybody needs to know?
Um, I mean, okay, here's one. Most of our thoughts in a day, and I'm sure you've heard of this, are negative, and that's that little voice in your head that's always full of doubt, insecurity, always talking yourself down, and saying all those things that are kind of self-limiting beliefs. If you can just catch yourself and reframe that and say, instead of saying I have to work out, saying I get to work out. That little like change is everything right there. That is everything. If you could just do that, forget all other like tips and tricks for your mindset and everything. It's just that. Just if you start thinking positive thoughts, and I know it sounds so cliche, but you will find positivity in everything. Like I find that sometimes I catch myself smiling uncontrollably. I'm just like, what am I like? Why am I so happy? This is great. I'm just like, I got nothing to worry about. Everything's great.
The last question, I like to flip the script a little bit. So instead of me asking the question, it's you asking the question, but it's not to me. So pretend you have a crystal ball and you can ask this crystal ball any question, you'll get the 100% honest answer. What is one question you want to know the answer to?
Oof. I would love to have the answer to the question. I'd probably ask like Elon Musk with this whole Neuralink thing. Has he fully thought out all the implications that this can have on human existence in the future, before just rolling it out and like getting it to the richest bidder at the beginning? Because I love Elon Musk, I love everything he's up to, and it sounds like such a great project and it fires me up. But I also watch a lot of Black Mirror, and I could see that going south, man, pretty quickly, especially getting in the wrong hands. And I know it's all with good intentions right now, fixing Alzheimer's and all these kinds of diseases. But the minute you could start reading people's minds and start like, I don't know, bro. It's like, yo, Elon, have we thought of all this? Have we thought this through? You're doing a lot. You're doing a lot of shit. Like, can we talk about this for a second?
Yeah, I love it. What a great question. No one's asked that question before, so I love when I get a new answer to that. But I think we're hovering around the 2 hour mark, man. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast. I want to give you the floor. Where can the people find you? Plug anything and everything you got right now.
Dude, first of all, thanks for having me, man. This is an incredible episode. I love your style of podcasting. I had so much fun today. I feel like we could do another 2, 3, 4 hours like this. It's just time flew. But to plug myself, man, you can find me on social media, deepaksharma.co. And you could also, also my website. So deepaksharma.co.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you once again for taking time to be on this podcast. And I want to thank everybody for listening, whether you've listened the entire way through or you only listen to bits and pieces. I really appreciate you taking time to check this out. Everyone, do me a big favor. Go and follow Deepak. Go check out his website. I'll make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below. If you'd like to follow me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at the Jacob Kelly. Feel free to come and say hello. My DMs are always open. If you'd like to follow the podcast, you can find us on Instagram at My Social Life Podcast or YouTube by searching up My Social Life. As always, today's podcast is powered by Trufan. Thank you once again for listening, everybody. We'll talk soon.